the industry is ready. Like I think the market always responds. And I'll say it this way: like if there's a standard or requirement that an owner puts out, if there is something in an RFQ or an RFP that says we're looking for this, the industry will break their necks to figure out the technology and bring greater value. And so, not to put it all on owners, but I think we kind of owe it to owners to do lunch and learns, to help them understand what's going on. And honestly, there's more human error than there in some of the stuff that we do than there is in technology anyway. So why not, to your point, lean on the technology to do the computational things, to do the repetitive things, to do the things that really technology is there for.
Welcome to Convos with Chris, inside the minds of infrastructure experts, where I dive deep with industry leaders redefining how we plan, design, build, and deliver future-proof infrastructure through AI and innovation. I'm your host, Chris Garafola, Head of Content at 4M. Chris here, Head of Content at 4M, where your utility research and project planning begins. Joining me today is Dwight Pullen Jr., a leading voice in the airport infrastructure market sector. He is currently the Senior Vice President of Global Aviation at AECOM and has over 28 years of experience managing engineering programs. His career portfolio includes senior leadership positions at DPR, Skanska, and 𝑐H2M, where he was instrumental in building relationships and driving growth. Dwight recently joined 4M as one of our new board of advisors, and he's an expert in aviation and engineering program management. Dwight, thank you so much for joining me today.
Chris, thanks a lot.
Dwight, can you tell just the audience just a little bit more about yourself? I know Sure. I kind of gave you a little bit of teed you up there, but just why you wanted to get into this industry in the first place. What's your current role? We'd love to learn a little bit more about you.
Sure. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and got involved in math and science really early on. Wanted to go to Georgia Tech. And ended up starting my educational journey at Georgia Tech. I ended up finishing at University of Pittsburgh, so kind of did 3.5, 4 years at Tech in Atlanta, then finished up at Pittsburgh with a civil engineering degree. And so that's kind of the educational background. I made a conscious decision when I moved back to Atlanta right before the Olympics to get into infrastructure. It was a really strange time. It was around 94, 95, and it was a strange time in the industry where it didn't seem like a lot of organizations were hiring engineers civil engineers at the same rate maybe years before. And there was a big infrastructure program going on for the city of Atlanta. And I got a chance to be on a program and construction management team as just a young engineer right out of school. And I was a project engineer and assistant project manager and overseeing kind of design and construction. And we were doing sewer, sanitary sewer, combined sewer overflows. It was just all infrastructure in preparing an older city like Atlanta for the Olympics. And so it was just a big infrastructure. It was at the time, they were dropping billions, these days in capital programs. This was about a $300 million program, and it was a big program for the early 90s, $300 million in utility infrastructure. Like, what is that? So, no, it was a phenomenal opportunity. I was working for a minority-owned company at the time, and it was kind of my entree into this industry, into what I would consider the infrastructure industry. And if I jump real quick, I kind of navigated my career from running large capital programs. I'm, moving my way up kind of the career ladder. So for the first 15 years, I would say I was just running programs. I went from a 300 million to a 500 million, to 500 million to $1 billion program, like just running capital programs. And in all those programs, the common thread was in every program, there's a utility infrastructure component that you gotta respect, that you gotta understand. And then I had an opportunity at the end of that first 15 years to go overseas in the Middle East, and went to Abu Dhabi and Dubai and did a large airport capital program, $10 billion program there. And it doesn't matter what country, it doesn't matter where you are, it's the same issues, same challenges with infrastructure. And so that's the first 15 years of my career. The last 15 years, I'm 30 years in the industry this year, and the last 15 years has really been on market leadership and leading large capital program teams and working with clients, acting as an advisor, doing thought leadership, that type of thing, and strategic strategy and growth with different companies. And what I've really loved about that is that, you can build on what you've learned over the first part of my
Mhm.
career to really and advise clients, advise teams, help teams prepare for winning work, and help them understand the nuances of what challenges owners face and how we navigate those challenges. And I'm always the one in the room bringing up subsurface issues, like
Mhm.
it's the stuff you don't see. The aging infrastructure that we're dealing with specifically in the U.S., but I
Right.
got to tell you, it's around the world.
Right.
So yeah, so that's a little bit of a highlight of my career. Been with AECOM for the last 3 years. Um, it's interesting. I've spent time on the engineering side, time on kind of the program management consulting side, time on the construction side with Skanska and DPR, as you mentioned, and back into the engineering space. And I really love what I do. And just a unique aspect of one of the things I love to do is, this industry has afforded me so many tremendous opportunities. And to be an advisor to a company like 4M, to work with small, underutilized businesses, to help diversify our industry and bring new faces to the industry, like we need it. I mean, we have a baby boomer generation that is either retired or retiring that
Mhm.
has created a huge void. And so if we're going to be competitive in the global space, if we're going to, meet the needs, infrastructure needs of our country, we have to get out there and get the younger generation interested in this as a career. So I'm a big advocate and champion for exposing women and historically underutilized communities to the industry as well, because we can get great contribution and great input from that. So I might weave a little bit of that in there, but that's the type of thing that really excites me about the industry.
That's great. I love that. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're just trying to progress our country's infrastructure
100%.
in whatever
That's
way we can do that. If it's, getting more people involved in that, in the industry, if it's using technology to make us more efficient so we can build more faster. I mean, we all have skin in this game.
right.
And I know I'm not the expert here today. You're the expert here today, but I'm a consumer of the infrastructure. So like that's one of the reasons what drew me to 4M is because it's a purpose greater than me. It's actually, it's affecting my wife, my daughter, future generations. So it's such a powerful and important initiative to be a part of.
Hmm.
And it's interesting too, because you mentioned the aging infrastructure, and that kind of gets me thinking about this macro narrative that I've been writing more and more about is, we have this aging infrastructure, we have a skilled labor shortage, we have extreme weather, which it it's getting stronger every year. I mean, we're in 2024 right now as this recording happens. There was just the Milton hurricane, Helene, I think.
Helene.
Uh, I'm in North Carolina right now. Just moved from Boston, and Asheville
Mm,
just got flooded really bad. And the infrastructure is straining right now.
right.
And yet we're getting a lot of funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, right? So it's an interesting time where, okay, we have all this funding, but how can we actually utilize this funding, right? And
Mm,
I think there's a lot of ways we can utilize that funding, which I'm sure
mhm,
you can, dive into a little bit more later. But one thing that I was going to ask you
mhm,
is talking about 4M. You have been on multiple sides of the table. You have all this experience. 4M, why 4M particularly? Like, why did that catch
mm,
your attention?
mm.
Sure, you're an advisor for other companies. You could have, there's time is finite, right? Like,
Right.
you only have so
Right.
much time in the day. Why would you want to spend some of your time helping 4M progress our vision and our mission for the industry?
Great question. For me, it was really straightforward. When I was approached about 4M, I gotta tell you, my initial thought was I knew nothing about 4M. My initial thought was, okay, can I take on any more? Do I have any more capacity? But one of the things tying back to this younger generation and exposure is that construction has been the slowest and ripe for the most disruption, but it's been the slowest to quality changes, the slowest to technology changes. Don't get me wrong, we have advancements in technology and we're seeing quality improvements, but honestly, there are a lot of aspects, not just in utility construction, building construction, heavy civil construction. There's a lot of aspects that it's been done the same way for years, and it's been slow as an industry, as a sector, to shift. And so that to me creates opportunities for digital disruption, for innovation. And, both at AECOM and me personally, I just think the companies that are not invested, engaged, aware, and partnering with companies like 4M are going to get left behind. And I don't want to be on that side of history. I want to be on the side of history that said, okay, what did we do to push the narrative, to drive innovation, to drive technology improvements, to leverage AI and technology to make this industry a lot more efficient, a lot with greater quality, with greater certainty, and there's a value proposition of just lowering cost and lowering time. And so to me, it just made sense. And I know that within AECOM, there is a kind of a digital revolution happening, even within AECOM, where they want us as leaders just out there looking at the best and the brightest that will change infrastructure. And so, so there's many reasons there, personal and professional, but quite honestly, it's the type of thing that I feel like we should be doing. I think it's the right. I'm gonna be a little bit corny here and just say I think it's the right stewardship thing that as leaders we should do is look for the technology, the innovations, and the improvements that move the needle, that save money, that save time, that bring greater quality, bring greater certainty. Our clients expect it from us, to be quite honest with you. And so now, being an advisor, I just get a front row seat and a look at how we do it and how we can help our clients. And I selfishly, as an owner's rep for many, many years, I selfishly see it as how can we help our owners solve their greatest challenges. And so to me, that's why 4M, that's why the board of advisors, and just honored to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it's one thing if the technology didn't exist too, because you mentioned stewardship. It's almost like we have this responsibility.
Oh yeah.
And it's one thing if the technology didn't exist, but the technology exists. It's just a matter of awareness and
That's
then enablement and using it, right? And
That's right.
I know that people can be skeptical of AI, and I mean, I'll be honest, it's sometimes it's hard to understand, like, how does this even work, right? It kind of seems like magic, but it works, and it's something that I think even I'm starting to understand and embrace more, where it's not a replacement, it's more of like an augmentation. It's augmenting the job, empowering you, and enabling you to do more of the strategic work, and let the mundane tasks kind of be
That's right.
with used with AI. So in that case, it's like, the technology exists. It's like, how can we now get the message out there? How can we get more people to embrace this technology? Because I know this industry, to your point, has been a little bit slower to adapt certain technologies than under other industries. And I want to make sure that we understand that the comparison between using AI in like an email solution or an accounting program is different than working with infrastructure where you're building things that are bridges and roads that the traveling public is using, and there's high stakes there. So do you think part of that slow to adapt for the construction industry is because of trust in the fact that the stakes are higher and it is a complex industry, right? There's a lot involved. It's not so easy that, all right, here's a new solution, let's just tack on it and it's going to solve all the problems.
I think there's a natural fear of change, and I think it's more about the fear of change. I have a lot of conversations with chief development officers of major agencies, and I love the folks who do that. But I would tell you, 60% of them are so old school. Love them, but they are old school. They still want to see a set of drawings. Like, you know what I mean? They can't even graduate to an iPad and everything else. If you don't have a set of drawings, they're like, what are you coming here? So you gotta, and it's kind of, and I think that as if we can work with agencies to build the trust and certainty that you talked about, I think the industry is ready. Like I think the market always responds. You know, and I'll say it this way: like if there's a standard or requirement that an owner puts out, if there is something in an RFQ or an RFP that says we're looking for this, the industry will break their necks to figure out the technology and bring greater value. And so, not to put it all on owners, but I think we kind of owe it to owners to do lunch and learns to help them understand what's going on. And honestly, there's more human error than there in some of the stuff that we do than there is in technology anyway. So why not, to your point, lean on the technology to do the computational things, to do the repetitive things, to do the things that really technology is there for. And listen, I'm old enough to remember when no one carried around cell phones, even before we carried around pagers and beepers, right? You know what I mean? But now we're doing banking on them. Like, really? Like,
Yeah.
we would never have done that. Like, and
Mhm.
so that change is the same change that has to happen in
Mhm.
our industry. And it, to your point, it's adoption and adaptation. It's both. We have to adapt and we have to adopt. And I think there's a fear of bleeding edge versus, and cutting edge. I think there's a fear to be the first or to be
Yeah.
out there doing it. And so one of the things I love about the industry, the construction industry, the infrastructure industry, is that I think that really great companies will make it transparent to their client anyway. They'll do it because it's the right thing to do and because it saves money and time and it's more efficient. And I think that's going to be one way to change it, but it won't change everybody that way. So
Mhm.
I think there's an element of fear, there's an element of the unknown and just uncertainty and unaware and education, honestly. And so that's why I started out talking about some of our clients who are just old school. Like they've done it this way. It works. Why fix something that's not broke, right? It's that type of thing. But I tend to challenge those same owners, those same leaders that, hey, how do you do your banking? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like technology is there. It's a tool. It's no different than a sledgehammer. It's a
Right.
tool. It's a
Mhm.
tool to help us do this better. It's a tool to give us a capability and a leverage. And so that's how I try to break it down like a fax machine, man. I know people don't know what a facsimile machine is, but I remember when that was like, oh, that's a big deal. Use the facsimile machine. Well, I remember we went from DOS to Windows. Like, oh my God, what are we doing? Going
Mhm.
from DOS to Windows. So it's just an embracing of innovation, and that's why I almost steer away from embracing of new technology and just say, hey, innovation. You can innovate the simplest of things, even around your home. You can innovate the simplest of things. This is just that. How do we innovate, which should bring tremendous value to
Right.
you, the owner? And so I think it's going to require us to be those leaders. And I think companies like 4M can absolutely and should be at the forefront of that conversation as it relates to utilities.
That I feel like at some point with every new innovation or every new technology, you look back and now you're like, how did I ever do it before? When you're talking
Right,
about the fax
right.
machines and the pagers, and then when something better came out or a newer technology or innovation, it was scary. But now, hindsight's 2020, but fast forward 20, 30 years, you look back and like, how did we even do that? And I feel like this is one of those situations with 4M.
Yeah, it
And
is.
I, where it's like, you're going to look back 10, 20 years and like, wow, how did we even do that? I can't believe I was afraid of that. But the way I view it too is, innovation, advancements are going to happen regardless whether you like it or not. And it's
Oh
one of
yeah.
those things where like ChatGPT is a thing now, right? I'm a content marketer and say, is it going to take my job? Well, the thing is, it could if I don't embrace it, right? Like I feel like
Hmm.
this is the world we live in now, and so I just have to
Yeah.
understand how to use it, not so it
That's right.
replaces me, but I can use it. To your point,
Oh
it's a
yeah.
tool. You still need the person holding that hammer to hit the
You
hammer. It's just a
still do.
tool. And
That's right.
so, can you
That's
be
right.
better at using that tool? And I think that's kind of what we're talking about now. But to your point, having the thought leaders and really putting that message out there and leading that charge will help people and build the trust. And it's not the marketing companies, it's not me, it's you,
Mhm.
it's the people that are actually using this technology, using the solution, the boots on the ground that need to be able to see the value, obviously, and be the voice. Because, like I was saying earlier offline, it, we know we love our product, right? But we think about our product way more than anybody else probably thinks about our product. It's just the nature of everybody's product,
Yeah.
and so it's really important for the people using it to see the value. And that brings me to another question, actually,
Sure.
Dwight, is how specifically in the aviation infrastructure industry you see 4M really making the biggest impact. um, our technology with the fast, instant access to reliable utility data early on in the project construction lifecycle. How do you think that would impact the aviation industry in particular?
Well, I'm I'm gonna look into my crystal ball here a little bit. Okay, so please,
Yeah.
please be prepared to correct me if I misstate something. But I also want to give you a little context about aviation, and I'm going to specifically talk about airports. Airports are major hubs of activity, infrastructure. It's where cars and planes and trains meet to move people. They're mobility centers. And so they're hugely important to growth of the middle class. They're hugely important to connecting rural communities to urban centers, like connecting city to city, point to point. Like, so if you think about the growth that we're seeing globally, airports are typically the driver of that growth. So investment in airports is absolutely essential, as we are, just becoming more global and connected. So why do I say that? Because airports typically were not always airports, right? They were Sometimes they were airfields from former military bases. I know one airport, Atlanta Hartsfield, was a racetrack.
Hmm.
Like it was a racetrack. The busiest airport in the world was a racetrack, you
Wow.
know, 60, 70 years ago, maybe even 50 years ago. So that the intent here to me is understand that we're building on top of aged things that were there. Well, what happens when you want to do a new runway or extend a taxiway? What happens when you want to realign a roadway to make room? You're running in to what was there before, right? And so I got to tell you, there's nowhere in the world, and airports are having to be smart about expansion. Real
Hmm.
estate is a premium at airports, and I'm not just talking about around a terminal building. I'm talking about airports are typically, if you think about, I'll use Denver Airport for an example. Denver Airport is 53 square miles. Denver Airport landmass is larger than Manhattan.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
most people don't know that. So there are these huge landowners, and they're doing everything from the roadways and the different lines to doing water treatment plants and energy plants and you name it, hotels, train stations, terminal buildings, concourses, fire facilities. They just have all types of their little cities. And so I set that up to say you cannot, in a smart way, plan and design for renovation, expansion, remodel, retrofitting, greenfield, brownfield. You can't do it without a real understanding of infrastructure. And many times, the people who are doing it there today that are with the owners organization, they know nothing about the history. They weren't there,
Mm-hmm.
right? They weren't there. And so, and then they probably have a room full of blueprints,
Right.
that they still probably need to transition to BIM and other things. And so there is a challenge. And let's be really clear, the Biden infrastructure law and all the things that are happening with the investment, that's fairly new. And so airports are trying to keep up with the demand of passengers and cargo and movement of goods and services and people. And so they are, if you go into any airport, I guarantee you 90% of the time you're seeing construction going on at the airport. 90% of the time, because they're trying to keep up. The average age, let me give you a stat here. The average age of a domestic U.S. airport terminal building is about 45 years.
Wow.
Beyond the use, so they're
that.
way beyond the useful life of those facilities. And the growth is probably 2 to 3x from when that building was originally put there. And we tend to think of terminal buildings as that's the airport. No. The terminal buildings, you still got to do roadways to those terminal buildings. You still got to provide energy. Like you still got to do all these different. You got to have runways and so all of the airport is expanding. And so I would tell you that yeah, I think 4M could play a tremendous role in reliability of utility infrastructure, especially. So we typically think about the top 25 airports, Atlanta, Chicago, Denver, DFW, LAX, JFK. Honestly, the ones that really are in need are the mid and small airports, the Cincinnatis, the Pittsburghs, because they're expanding, but they probably have their terminals are probably 40, 50, 60 years old, meaning that they didn't have the growth of urbanization that other cities have. St. Louis, I can go down Cleveland, go down the whole Rust Belt. Like there's a lot of airports. Kansas City just did expansion. And the challenging thing is that they still had the need. The growth didn't come as fast as the larger cities, but didn't take away the need.
Right.
And they probably don't have the staffs and the actual data and intelligence from recent expansions. So they're in a really tough spot to upgrade. And so I'm going to keep it on the civil side outside the building, but they're doing the same thing. And here's the thing of why it's so important, and why 4M can play a major role at airports, is that airports are there's a 10-mile roadway to get into Denver Airport. Like that, the airport owns that roadway, but it's 10 miles long. It's an expressway, and so the airport's responsible for that. Exactly. So the airports could be they're their own public works, DOTs.
Yeah.
They don't have, I mean, they're truly not like a DOT, obviously, with the miles and miles and miles of roadways, but it is a big deal at an airport because they do have other roadways infrastructure they got to deal with. And sometimes it was farmland, and that's pretty straightforward, right? And sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes it was a former community. I know when I was in Atlanta working there, they acquired an entire community to create the new fifth runway, and I was the program manager for it. The infrastructure associated with that was unbelievable. It was unbelievable because it was apartment buildings and other things and industrial facilities. They were all there. All this utilities underground and some things that you're just not aware of. So like cemeteries and things like that. So Indian burial grounds. So anything that informs us on subsurface issues is hugely important because budgets are really tight and they can't afford for a mistake to happen on the infrastructure side. They really can't. So they really, from pothole, so there's a lot of time spent on potholing and LIDAR and you name it, subsurface investigations, trying to figure out what's happening underneath the surface. So yeah, this is a huge issue. It's different. It's different than highway and transit in my view. It's a little different than that, but it's still as important, to have technology that helps you kind of understand what's happening.
Right. And you mentioned that airports are just such a hub. There's so much going on there. And I think with that, it just adds regulations. They have to have a lot of regulations to protect the people that
Absolutely.
are going in and out of these airports.
Mhm.
How does that play with technologies and innovating? Is there some kind of challenge with implementing, say, something like a 4M with some of these aviation infrastructure projects because of all the regulations?
No, not really. I mean, FAA is the regulator for aviation, much like FHWA for highways and FTA for transit, right? And there's typically, it depends on the facility or the asset, I will say that. But I would say that, it really rests with the developer organization, the agency, like the airport. Airports are either city, state, authorities, sometimes they're county, sometimes they're tri-state, bi-state organizations, sometimes they're municipal or they're city owned. But whoever has the development right, and let me just say this, even airlines could have development rights at airports. So sometimes you see airlines like Delta did all the infrastructure development and terminal development for LaGuardia C and D, Terminal C and D, all that work. Terminal B was a private developer that was a third party developer that did it on behalf of the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. So there's a lot of ways this infrastructure is getting done and getting built and getting designed and constructed. But going back to your question, you have to follow typically local codes. Like, you know what I mean? You have that type of code restrictions and things you got to follow. And I think respecting and understanding that is super important. Identification of utilities is super important, right? Especially when you're dealing with an older city where, they probably buried on top of it, there's buried lines and everything else on top of each other. And so sometimes the utility company doesn't even know what's underground. And so that's typically the case, right? So I would say that almost always from a risk transfer gets transferred to the contractor, to the developer who's actually doing the work. And so they have to follow certain codes and building codes and things like that and designing for stuff like that. But I would say that, it's not more or less than what you would deal with any infrastructure project.
Got you. Yeah, I was trying to connect the dots where is there any reason why we wouldn't be implementing solutions like 4M for these projects? And it sounds like no.
Like I told you, I think it probably is the types of designers and contractors that work at airports are a unique breed, by the way. They probably aren't the same and more than likely are not the same that would do a big highway job or a big transit job. And so, but sometimes they are, but they're a different division. And so you might see improved use of the technology that 4M does on that, and they just haven't applied it. And sometimes they do. It just depends on the organization. I think the more collaborative and innovative the delivery partner, the architecture, engineer, and construction company, the more collaborative and innovative they are, smart ones bring new ideas and technology to their clients.
Right.
In fact, I see 4M. I mean, 4M can obviously help owners broadly, right? But I also see that the private sector could utilize and see 4M as a real differentiation of what they bring to help solve a problem. And so yeah, I don't see that there would be any challenge with bringing it. And I think it would be welcomed. I think to a certain degree because of the speed of which these projects have to get done, that I think owners are beginning to expect it. Like they want it and they expect you to bring the innovation, the technology, the new ideas, and really good contractors and designers do that. They're going to want to bring the best. Like, oh, to solve this problem, let's try this.
Right.
Right.
Right. That, and like any new technology, before it becomes mainstream and a household name, your
Yeah.
competitive advantage is only, it might not be that long. So like the early
Right.
adopters, I know there might be, you might think of it as a little risky. Well, the flip side of that is you can have a competitive advantage where you're utilizing this technology. You're the pace setter,
Right.
and before you know it, everybody's gonna catch on and everybody's gonna be using it. So think of this as like a moment to kind of shine and get ahead of it. And I think that's like with any kind of technology, you might be hesitant
It
at
is.
first, but the flip side is the world is your oyster in the early days, and then before you know it, everybody's using it, which would be a good thing. But
I will tell you that one of the challenges, and I'm putting on my owner's hat here. One of the challenges I think owners have is honestly, they're getting hit up by all types of technology now,
yeah,
and trying to sift out who truly has the right technology,
Mm,
what value this is, what is the level of certainty, is this better than this approach? That probably is the hardest thing that owners have to deal with, is that, you know, why this over that? If there's anything, and I've, as I'm talking to 4M and better understanding 4M, I'm asking the same questions. Hey, tell me who your competitors are and what's the differentiation between what you do and your competitors. That's what owners want to know. They want to know, why would I use 4M? And
mm,
so I think that level of differentiation is super important. Um, if it complements another technology, knowing that is super important to owners and to, like I said, I sit on a lot of different seats as program managers. Sometimes we are owners' representatives, so we're representing the owner.
mhm,
Making owners reps aware of it is super important, because
mhm.
they might say, hey, to Mr. Contractor, have you considered this? Have you looked at this? And so that, or even to the designer, have you looked at this? And so it's an ecosystem of professional services and contractors that really do need to be smarter about technologies like 4M analytics.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, it's a saturated market, and I mean that's like marketing in general too. There's so much noise out there,
Oh,
and
yeah,
how are we going to resonate? And is it simply just saying this is what Forum can do? There's no single source of truth for utility data. You can literally just draw a polygon, press get data, and like instantly. How long would that have taken you to get utility record research for this? It's just,
yeah,
it seems like just a logical place to start. It's
right.
still not removing people from putting a hole in the ground to see if a pipe's really there, but it gives them somewhere to start to look. And there's no solution that I know of that can do that right now. And kind of just keep going back to your stewardship and like this responsibility. If we can get 1% better every day,
Yeah,
just even 1%, like
that's
this
right.
isn't going to solve all the problems, right? There's still going to be, things that happen, but that's just progress in general. It's like 1% better every day. And
Yeah.
I think this is again, I might be biased, but it seems like a logical next step for.
Oh, it absolutely is. Absolutely is. Especially in the early days of planning for major projects.
Hmm, hmm.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about that. So when I think of an airport that's ready, I always think of, so how much work was done on the utility side before you launch this $1 billion project? Not while you're launching the $1 billion project, but in preparing and planning what you're going to do, because that might drive your budget a certain direction. That might tell you, like I was talking to the owner here at Denver Airport, where I live here in Denver, and they have some type of 5 kV line going diagonally under the existing terminal. Not sure why that's there. And so that's a big utility issue. But then what are all the other lines off of that if you have to relocate that? Like it's a huge issue, of how you're going to, and they're looking to expand their terminal. So that's where, kind of certainty is really important, because it's not like you can just go dig. It's in the basement. It's below the basement of the building. It's below the train. It's, you really
Right.
do need a very accurate understanding of what's happening beneath the surface. And so yeah, I could think of all
Right.
types of things that come up.
And as early as possible, because the further
as
you
early as
go into that
possible.
construction life cycle, the costlier it gets. The earlier
Absolutely.
you can nip it in the bud, it's
Absolutely.
going to just save so much time, cost, and it almost you have to start with it. Like there's no
Airport development entities, typically, they should have all of that utility infrastructure understood before they even put out for the first design. Like that's a smart one is doing that now before they even fund the project because it's
Mhm.
going to tie right into the cost of the project.
Now, do you think they don't do that now because it takes time, it's too much money, it's too like what?
I think they are overwhelmed with the speed in which they got to get gates operated or open up that rental car facility, or
Okay,
it's the urgency of
right,
infrastructure is what's happening. It's
right.
just there probably is not sufficient time to do all of that proper due diligence, right?
So it
And
seems
that's
speed is
so it ends up getting pushed into the design process when really it should happen before you start design.
got you, got you. So even if so it sounds like speed to data, speed to this
Speed,
information is the crux of like a
100%.
huge issue. And if you can get speed to that data, even if it's not 100% accurate, because again, you
Yep,
still gotta, if you're using 4M, you still gotta have somebody go to the field and validate that it's there, but it gives you a good enough start, somewhere to start that you don't have right now.
that's right.
And so and if you hear a crying baby, by the way, that's my 1-year-old daughter saying hi in the background.
Tell her I said that.
Dwight was
That's
telling
pretty
me he has,
cool. That's the new world of virtual connection here. Like dogs barking, cats walking
yeah,
across the screen.
yeah. It's a great way to humanize this. Like, hey,
Oh
this, at
yeah,
the end of the day, we're all human. We got crying babies. We got dogs
that's right.
barking in the back.
Oh, I've been on calls with clients and they got it. It's fine. It's
That's so
fine.
funny. Um, well, Dwight, I would love to hear a story. You have all this experience. You've done tons of projects. I'm sure tons of major projects. Is there a project specifically that you can think of where reliable utility data early on in the project would have greatly impacted the project outcome?
Yeah, no,
I know that's kind
absolutely.
of a loaded
Yeah,
question.
no, it is. So I was the program manager for a $1.2 billion new runway at Atlanta. And we had to actually, this is a different project here, but it's a story nonetheless. We had to really bring the runway up high enough to go over 18 lanes of expressway. So this runway literally crosses Interstate 285. And so this was the largest public works project in the history of the state of Georgia. We had to build tunnels and bridges to put the runway over. So I'm giving you the context of this runway and the scale and size of this runway. And we had to bring in about um, 20 million cubic yards of fill. 20 million cubic yards of fill. So let me explain what that is. That was enough at the time. The Georgia Dome was up. This now it's Mercedes-Benz Stadium. It was enough to fill the Georgia Dome with dirt 3 times over. Okay, so you get the scale of this project. Well, that project sat on hundreds and hundreds of acres of all types of stuff. Like, I mean, from apartment buildings, like I said, there were roadways there. There were utility lines. This was Atlanta's a really, really old city, and this was right across 3 jurisdictions: City of Hateville, Clayton County, City of College Park. There were utilities everywhere. Like it was everywhere. And you're just bringing dirt in. But what you don't know is there are large utilities. There are water tributaries. There are old trunk lines. There's all types of stuff. And we hit the contractor in removing some rock hit a big line that started a flood and flooded equipment. Equipment fell in, it opened a big water line, and I mean, it was a major claim. Just a little understanding of how to navigate that site. And this site was huge. Like I said, hundreds of acre site because it's a runway. This is before you ever get to the point of paving the runway. This is just years before that. But it probably set the job back about 3 to 6 months. It probably cost between 40 and $50 million to address the issue. And really, it was something that really just should have been caught at the early part of the project. to relocate certain lines or to abandon certain lines or things like that. So that's the story I think about, like when I think about major utility. Now that is a very unique story because it was a runway and it was a very unique runway. But this runway was a $1.284 billion runway. This runway could not be late. This runway would have really, I think it was causing any delay to this runway opening was causing the entire air system at the busiest airport. It was causing the entire U.S. air system $5 million a day in delays. So you get the point.
Right.
Anything that delayed the critical path of opening up this runway, no matter if it's 3 years ahead of time, it caused a major disruption. And so we had to figure out ways to mitigate that loss throughout the project to make up for it. That could have been avoided.
Wow. And all it takes is one, right? All it takes is just one. And it's wild to think that urgency seems to be the key word here, and how the urgency led to actually the project taking another 3 to 6 months because the urgency in the beginning was there. Whereas I like the saying, you go slow to go fast.
You go slow to go fast. Absolutely.
And this was seems like a story where you went fast to go slow. So if you could turn it back in time,
fortunate enough, we had 3 to 4 years of time that we were able to make that up and speed up certain parts of the project and deliver it 10 days early. We actually opened up the runway 10 days early. But that we delivered it 10 days early in other phases. And that's what helped us. So we had to, because we were, and I also think not only did we hit a thing, I think it was a major storm event too. So it was like the perfect storm of things happening right when this line was hit. So, yeah, no, you said it right though. This, in the moment, you may not even have all the right people dealing with solving the issue. You may not even have all the information, and you're going fast because you got to get things going. You got to get dirt moving. You got to show progress early in projects. And so sometimes you go fast when you don't need to go fast. You need to go slow.
Oh, thanks for sharing that story. That's
absolutely.
That was just one in your toolbox. You probably got many, many more.
I do. Yeah, I do.
Wrap it up with just, if you could sum up 4M's value in one word, what would it be? If you were going to tell any of your industry network, your partners, you were going to describe 4M to them in one word, what would it be and why?
So I guess in one word, that's a good one. I always, when I'm talking to clients in the industry, anything that can give you a level of certainty early. So certainty is probably the word. I think owners are always looking for a level of certainty before they move forward. They can't have 100%. They know that. Anything that gives them greater certainty about what they might deal with, about the unknowns. That's what I was going to say, the unknowns. That is valuable. And I would say to any infrastructure client or private company that you need to consider 4M to add that level of certainty to your projects, no matter what the project is. And no matter what the savings is, we'll take any savings we can get, right, in level of certainty. And so that to me is kind of, off the cuff what I would think about, and I would encourage firms and owners and agencies to think about when they're looking to add to their toolbox of technology and what's going to help their projects be successful. They should be considering 4M for that.
Right on. Well, Dwight, thank you so much for the conversation.
Absolutely.
I could speak to you for hours. So thanks for being.
I appreciate it, my friend.